We can have a conversation in the community here, but the issue of being Jewish is actually very central to the response that I've gotten. Actually, I was just, I've been getting a lot of anti-Semitic threats, to be honest, and I told you before the Nazis came and protested, and so it was weird because, like, this is not something I faced. I wrote a book about Black Americans, and nobody cared. I mean, they cared, but it wasn't like about me. The minute I'm a white person writing about white people, I'm seen as a traitor all of a sudden. And it's just so weird that that's when the attacks come in. And so many of the negative responses that I've gotten are things that are, you think you're American, but really you're a Jew. I mean, that was the email that I got. And in fact, I was just dealing with a Facebook controversy while Negev was speaking about this particular thing. And so, you know, part of the issue is this shows the power. When you start to divide people along lines, everybody becomes so tribal that everybody's against each other, and it creates all of these like almost laughable, idiotic things, but they also are serious things in a way. And so the question of, are white people Jewish, is something that I've been facing personally, and it wasn't just the conservative media. All of a sudden, after the Nazis, the liberal media, like the Washington Post and Vice, started calling me a Jewish author. And I never knew that I was a Jewish author, to be honest. I thought I was an author. And all of a sudden, they defined me in the liberal thing. So it's just funny how this whole thing about religion, but it's also a sign about when you have a pluralistic society and you start to fragment and create winners and losers, and people start to not trust each other, which is what happens with guns and factors like that. Any kind of solidarity, you have to fight for that, right? This idea that basically people have the same rights. I mean, we're having a big fight about the census in the United States right now, and it's really a debate about which people count, So it's very fundamental, and so I just think that's the thing that you have to protect. I mean, that's really where the barricade is, that I really feel very strongly about that.
First of all, thank you. It is really a fascinating talk, and I'm sure I will continue thinking about it. But I want to be a little provocative. It's not exactly a question. It's
Please
just
provoke.
thinking that, I have all this resentment to these white poor men and their ideals. But then I was thinking, how am I different? If you ask me, for example, what do you prefer, dignity or longevity? What do you prefer, not suffering and remaining independent, or a quick death?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I would say it's more important. I would say it's more important for me. What I understand is dignity, and for them, superiority. Feeling superior is more important.
Yeah.
Another thing, if you would ask me, would you want to be able to let go, to be allowed to kill yourself? And I would say, yes, that's part of my autonomy, my liberty, and that's what they do with the guns. So there are more similarities than what are portrayed in a way.
I mean, I will say the one difference is you're not defining your superiority by oppressing somebody else in the way you frame it.
Yeah, I agree, but I have my moral ideas which are sort of worth dying for, or and
I think
of course I don't agree with this, that it's worth dying for superiority, but let's face it, many people, soldiers do it. They say it's for defense. It's a very common human trait. It's a very fundamental human trait.
And I think the Democrats have totally missed this point in the United States. I mean, people put their lives on the line, for this stuff. Now, whether or not you think it's noble or something like that, I still think, people care more about gun rights. They care more about tax cuts. They care more about blocking Obamacare. In a way, and I just think, because I live part of the time in New York as well, and I just ask my liberal friends, how many of your political ideas are you willing to die for? And nobody can come up with an answer, really. It's a very hard question. And I think what I'm saying is, I think people totally underestimated the depth of the investment that people have in these kind of issues. I think that's exactly right. And I also think that they still kind of are struggling with that question. They think that when Trump supporters, like there was a big thing with tariffs and China, and all of these farmers in conservative states were seeing their profits go down. And there were all these articles, well, this is the moment that they're going to turn on Trump. And maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I still felt like they were misunderstanding the depth of this particular commitment, that it wasn't just about this one financial commitment. It was something much bigger, and I feel like that's been totally lost. And the other point is, I think there have been some missteps for people. I would love to hear about maybe tensions about this in Israeli context, but I will say, like a number of American Democratic politicians like Beto O'Rourke, he apologized for his white privilege in one of the debates or one of his interviews or something like that. And I just thought, you just lost the vote of every single person I talked to or something like that. So how to deal with it, right? Do you acknowledge your complicity? I don't know, there's something about it where people see Trump as much more honest even if he's an asshole because he's standing up for something.
May I ask a question?
You got it.
I wonder what you think about my existential class interpretation of what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe you wrote it yourself. I mean, you've been talking about the white American working class or poor, or the ones that are uninsured, which I don't know the figures, but maybe 20%, 15% of the white population.
It depends where you go. But
okay, anyway, what I'm asking is that it's like an existing group. What I'm asking is, what if it does exist objectively, but what if it does not exist? What I mean is, being white for these people that are being defined objectively as working class is being a middle class. That is, they consider themselves their ruling ideas are middle class. Being white is a middle class. Now, it means that if I am like a poor, uninsured, working class white man, I'm like a freak of nature. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm an accident. Maybe my siblings will not be like that because they will right in line, like Hochschild was talking about. They will be middle class. My right is to be a middle class. Mm-hmm. So I'm already adopting these middle class ideas, which are equated as white.
It's funny because part of the story that I tell is exactly that, right? It's a story of a system, right? Here are the people on the top, which the people I spoke with were not. And here are the people on the bottom, and they saw the people on the bottom as being the minorities and immigrants. And so they felt like they were here, maybe not in financial terms, but in terms of existential terms. I think you're exactly right. And so part of the fear of a government program that helped everybody was a fear that people on the bottom were going to come up and so W.E.B. Du Bois, the philosopher, called this a wage of whiteness. That was the term he used, that there was not so much a material or economic wage. It was a psychological wage, that at least in America, if you're white, you can feel superior to people who are beneath you, and for some people that's enough. And so I think you're right, it's very much in the American psyche in a particular way. The other point about insurance is it's also a story about liberals versus Democrats, because people probably saw, is today Tuesday or Wednesday? I'm kind of jet lagged. Okay, yesterday there was a very big case in the United States which might actually destroy the Affordable Care Act for the entire country. And everybody's freaking out about it, and people are saying it's going to be the end of Trump and the end of the Republican Party. But what they don't realize is most people who have the Affordable Care Act are in New York and Illinois and California. People in the South don't have it already. So it's not going to affect them at all. So in a way, this question of undermining Obamacare, it's almost seen as like a targeted way of refighting the Civil War. It's totally going to screw over the coasts much more.
But what I mean is, even me, which I'm only consuming American culture, and I've never been to US, and not to mention others, or in the American culture industry, there's a fascination with the American working class. Mm-hmm. Many series, it's like the West is still going on, or the South, or whatever. maybe this group does not exist. It exists objectively, but it does not exist subjectively. It denies its own existence.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
I'm going to put in one plug in relation to that point, two plugs. Number one, you can't really see it because of the color of the slide, but the book website is dyingofwhiteness.com, www.dyingofwhiteness.com, or if you go on my Twitter page, you can get it through there. But the reason I say that is because there's a section on the press, all the press I've done, and I did an interview with this guy, Chris Hayes, who's one of the big people on MSNBC. And we did an hour-long podcast, which is on that website, about social class and working class and white America. So if you want to hear more about that point, I felt like that interview was actually, I just wanted him to talk. He was so brilliant about it. But it really is, he made the same point, that it's an existential crisis in a way. And the other point is, there's also a biological crisis because people in America, white Americans are maybe going to become the demographic minority in about 20 more years. And so people are worried about that also. Yes?
What are the chances of dealing with such challenges without dealing with the fact, like Israel and the occupation, can you separate them? The US and all its history of racism and whiteness, can you separate it? What are the chances of fighting these, let's say, big challenges, but without addressing the history?
What do you think?
I think they are very slim, if not non-existent. But like, what way do you find this book as being part of, let's say, the historical thing of discussing it? Discussing slavery, Jim Crow?
I'll give you the small answer and the big answer. The small answer is now, every time I get an anti-Semitic tweet, I post it on my Facebook, and I say, is this the America we want? And so I create a conversation, and many of my conservative friends, I play softball, and softball, I have a lot of friends who are very conservative in Tennessee. They bring their guns to the softball game and stuff, but they're still on my softball team. And so I try to create a forum where we can have a conversation about this. And so every time I get one of these threatening tweets, I put it on Facebook, and it's the one place where my liberal friends and my conservative friends can have a conversation about, is this the kind of country we want? And my conservative friends give very surprising answers about, I support Trump and I support guns, but I think that we need a safe society and I'm willing to make sacrifices, like stuff like that. And so I think in a micro way, which is just at least the perfect world of my Facebook page, I think that I try to create those conversations because many of the people I spoke with were reasonable people until this kind of thing. So part of it is not stereotyping each other on a micro way. On a macro way, I share your pessimism because I can just say that if you look at historical examples of when people resolve tensions like this, they very rarely do it without some kind of major conflict, some kind of conflict that brings people together against a common enemy or something like that. And we don't have that right now. We're trying our best to make the whole world hate us, but except Israel. And so but I think where this is going, if we don't catch ourselves, can be a very bad place. I share that. Please.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I wanted to ask, why health? I mean, you edited a book not so long ago that said against health.
Yep.
And now you're taking this issue of race, class, so many other issues, and you're tackling it through life years and questions that are really quantifying all these values that we believe in into like health.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, part of what I do in all my work is show how health is incredibly political, right? That health outcomes that we want to think are biological are in fact the result of social structures and social systems. And it's tied, the book you're referencing is called Against Health. And it's a book about how people think health is either good and illness is bad. It should be just very clear. But it turns out there are all these other factors that tie into health. It's like, who do we think is healthy? Does it mean whose body is healthy, whose body is ideal. It ties in with race, it ties in with politics, with media, all these things. And I feel like, in a way, this book, on one hand, is a continuation of that argument, showing the profound political factors that shape not just health categories, but race categories. So I think that's part of it. But the other part is my book, Protest Psychosis. I did feel like it was too easy for people to discount me because I was just using the anecdotes and the qualitative research that Nadav was talking about. So I felt like adding the layer of data analysis. If you look on my press page, that's the kind of thing that gets all the press. And it helped me make an argument in a different way. But if you read the book, I'm actually very skeptical of data, right? So it's not like I'm just saying the public health framework is perfect and whatever. I have a lot of discussion about why it's problematic. Much of it is based on the census, which is very social, all these kind of things. So I don't take data straight on. But I do say that, if there's a camp of pro or anti-public health, I guess I do fall on the side of pro-public health.
So the United States went from Bush to Obama to Trump. And I'm sure that the poor whites you're talking about never voted for the Democrat in any of these elections. Mm-hmm. So how significant are they?
Well, they win.
But they lost for 8 years before Trump.
I know that they did, but when I talk to them and I say, don't you want to change? And they look at me like I'm the biggest idiot in the world because they said, well, we have the Supreme Court, we have Congress, we have Senate, we control all of these states in a particular way. So definitely, that's not what I want, but they see this as being the formula for a winning side. And so, again, there's a question of how important are they, and I think they're very important because the politics of these states are becoming our national platform. So that is incredibly important. And in that regard, I don't think it's, but I think there's a bigger question, which is, does that mean the Democrats should appeal to try to win these voters, or should they write them off? That's a different question, and I do worry about this a little bit because there is a formula where this kind of appeal, it's very calculated. It's very calculated in a particular way. The minute poor white people start demanding better health care, they're done. So I think it's very calculated, and I do think that a lot of the Democratic arguments so far are not being done thinking about the demographic blocks you need to win an election. So if abolishing ICE, for example, is going to win us an election, hey, let's do it. But if we need to appeal to crossover voters and then abolish ICE once we have some power, I'd prefer that personally. And the other thing is, I just don't think that the Democrats have addressed the polarization as it being a problem in itself. In other words, I don't think it costs them anything to acknowledge the suffering of white communities, even if it doesn't change their platform at all. And I really don't think they've done a good enough job of that because, people own guns for a lot of reasons, but also they're just scared and nobody's looking out for them and stuff like that. So I do think that there's a way of framing this to white working class voters that even Joe Biden sucks at it, and I just want them, I have a self-interest of wanting them to read my book, but I would also say, there's a way of acknowledging people's suffering that doesn't mean that you agree with their racist tendencies, and I don't think the Democrats have done that very well.
You talked a lot about class and race, but I think it's also a story of gender and not just class and race. And my question might be, have you did any comparison to white low-class women or women of color or just those intersections?
Yeah, great. You can't really tell from the talk. I do talk to a lot of women in the book. And there's some interesting stories. In the gun section, it's pretty terrifying how similarly pro-gun the women and the men are. I talked to mothers who lost their own kids from accidental shootings because they left their guns on the nightstand in their house, 9-year-old kid. And I would say, does that change your views about guns, and the women would tell me, this is gun country, it made us more pro-gun and stuff like that. So in the gun section, there was a lot of parallel between what the women and the men were saying. Healthcare was really, I did just talk to men. There was a number of reasons. It was the first project. I didn't know I was going to be writing this book. Men are less likely to go to the doctor, blah, blah, blah. But the education system was the place where the gender differences really showed up the most, because I did find a lot of women who, for them, cutting the schools was the last straw. And so Kansas is also important because it's a very slightly optimistic story, because mothers got together and pushed back on the tax cuts and ended up getting a lot more money back into the school system. So some of the women who are remarkable, who I talked to in Kansas, are talking as mothers and basically say, I'm not going to screw this up for my children. So that's the one place where gender matters. But it's interesting because, we have this thing called Moms Demand Action in the United States. Like, there's all these mothers groups against guns, but they have not really any political power quite yet. And so it was interesting that schools became the place where mothers could really push back.
I actually do want to refer to the health.
Yeah.
Does whiteness kill white women?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Does whiteness kill attack?
Right. No. Yeah. Absolutely. So the data that I showed you for the healthcare system was both genders. Yeah. So for sure.
I want to just mention that I more or less in love with Obama, just to make it clear.
Me too.
And not with Trump. But he had 8 years, and it didn't happen. Not less black people or people of color were killed by police, which is a very big subject now in Israel, as we know. But I just want to mention that, and I don't know how to understand it. It's easy to say Trump will fall. I don't see that solving the problem, although I hope it will happen. But I want to say also thank you to Nadav, because he brought, I don't know if he'll want to speak, or Atapo?
Lamala.
Oh, Lamala. He mentioned solidarity. And I think it's a tricky term, or maybe you can say some things about it academically or intellectually, because the other day I was at there was a demonstration of Israeli-Ethiopian Jews. It was mostly women, and I went, and there were other white people, and some came to me, why are you here, Ethiopians, and I didn't use the word solidarity, but that's what I'm actually saying. And for white privileged in this country, it would be maybe Jewish, also Ashkenazi, and that it's automatically we are the ones to be in solidarity with the poor, with people who don't have human rights and justice and all that. But for other groups, the groups that are, I don't know, like the victims or the ones who have less, I don't know the term, the what? Marginalized, or also occupied on all levels. So they are not automatically expected to have solidarity except for their own group. And where the higher groups will, so I don't know if you can speak about that, because I don't know if it's so...
Yeah, so two great points. First with Obama, certainly I think in retrospect, Obama could have been more aggressive. I mean, Obama wanted to be a centrist president in a way. And I think that the places where he tried the most, I mean, he passed healthcare reform, right? Huge deal. He tried everything he could do to move the gun issue. He worked so hard on this issue, but the whole Congress and Senate were against him because of the NRA. So ultimately what he did is he did an executive order that did a lot of the policies that would reduce gun death. Unfortunately, in the first week in office, Trump overturned all of those executive orders. Now, so I don't envy what Obama was trying to do, but he was trying to be the president for everybody in a way. And in retrospect, maybe he should have been more aggressive, but I make very clear that my book starts in 2010. So I start during the Obama era And so I don't blame Obama. I blame the resistance to Obama. But I think, in retrospect, they should have been much more aggressive about judges and other factors like that. I think they wish they could do that over again. So that's part of it. About the question of solidarity, which I think is important, it's such a big question for us, right? How do you create a sense of national unity, right? And I think that's the issue certainly for the United States right now. We're so divided into red America and blue America and, into this particular version of America, that in a way, how do you get people to see themselves as American, that there's this idea of a common good? I mean, many of the social programs that benefit most people in the country, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the civil rights legislations, they were all passed not just by black people or white people. They were passed by all kinds of people, and they benefited everybody. And I feel like we've lost that. And so part of what I learned in the book was how powerful this narrative is. A corporate narrative. Many people make a lot of money by making us think that we don't agree with each other. So how do you recapture that sense of being part of one nation? Do you fight with the other people? Do you try to create a bigger narrative? But part of it, I argue, is also to see what are the forces that are polarizing us, I mean, it's like the NRA does everything it can. I guarantee you half the anti-Semitic tweets I get are people who are paid for by the NRA and stuff like that. Like at every level, people are benefiting from this polarization. So I think it's also important to notice who are the agents of polarization because they tap into something so deep for us. Thanks, guys. All right, let's have a beer. Any beer.